Nora Brennan watched the pieces flutter to the sun-scorched platform, one half showing her hopeful smile, the other half trampled under Victor Hayes's boot as he walked away without a word. She'd traveled 2,000 miles across America to become someone's wife. It took him 10 seconds to decide she wasn't worth keeping. The train's whistle screamed. The crowd on the Montana platform went silent. Every eye on the woman left standing alone with her single carpetbag and her shattered future. And Nora Brennan realized she had nowhere left to go. No money for passage home, no family waiting, no plan beyond the marriage that had just dissolved before it began. But sometimes the worst rejections lead to the most unexpected redemptions. Sometimes being unwanted by the wrong person means being found by the right one. And sometimes a widowed rancher with his own ghosts and a motherless child can see what a cruel man cannot, that worth isn't measured in photographs or first impressions, but in the strength it takes to stand when everything falls apart. This is the story of Nora Brennan, who came to Montana as someone else's mistake and became exactly who she was meant to be. If this story moves you, please hit the like button and leave a comment with your city so I can see how far Nora's journey reaches. Now let's begin. That photograph means nothing now. Mail order bride rejected, then saved by widowed rancher. The summer heat pressed down on the Montana rail platform like a physical weight, turning the air thick and difficult to breathe. Nora Brennan stepped off the train into that heat, her dark traveling dress already damp with perspiration, her carpetbag heavy in her hand. Around her, the small crowd moved with purpose, families reuniting, merchants collecting shipments, cowboys heading toward the saloon across the dirt road. She stood still, searching faces, looking for a man she'd never met but had written to for 4 months. A man whose letters had painted pictures of a life she desperately wanted: stability, partnership, a home of her own. Victor Hayes, proprietor of Hayes Feed and Supply, age 32, seeking a wife of good character and pleasant disposition. In his photograph, he'd looked respectable, kind even. His letters had been carefully written, almost formal, describing his business, his modest home, his desire for a family. Nora had read those letters so many times the paper had grown soft at the creases. She spotted him easily. He was the only man standing near the platform holding a photograph, comparing it to each woman who descended from the train. When his eyes landed on Nora, there was a flicker of recognition. She lifted her hand in a small wave, her heart hammering. Victor Hayes looked at the photograph again, then at her face, then at her hips, fuller than they'd been 4 months ago when the photograph was taken, at her sun-reddened cheeks, at the way her dress pulled tight across her chest despite being her nicest garment, carefully pressed that morning, with hands that had trembled with anticipation rather than dread. Their eyes met, and in his expression, Nora saw something that made her stomach drop, a coldness, a calculation, a decision being made in real time. Without a word, Victor Hayes tore the photograph in half. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the afternoon stillness. He let both pieces fall from his fingers. They drifted down like leaves landing at Nora's feet on the weathered planks. One half showed her face, eyes bright with hope that now felt like the worst kind of naivety. The other half showed her hands folded in her lap, the pose the photographer had insisted upon. Victor turned and walked away. Just like that. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement that Nora was a human being who traveled 2,000 miles based on his letters, his promises, his carefully constructed courtship. The platform fell silent. Nora stood frozen, staring at the torn photograph. Around her, conversations had stopped. People were watching now, witnessing her humiliation with the avid interest of those who'd found unexpected entertainment on an ordinary Friday afternoon. The train began to pull away behind her, the engineer oblivious to the disaster unfolding on the platform. Smoke and steam billowed around Nora as the cars picked up speed, and she had the sudden, irrational thought that she should run after it, should climb back aboard and pretend this had never happened. But she had no ticket for the return journey, no money for passage. She'd spent everything she had to come here. Well, the voice came from her left female, and Shar with something between pity and satisfaction. I suppose that's that then. Nora turned slowly. A woman in a green bustle dress stood beside the station house, fanning herself with deliberate slowness. Her eyes were bright with the kind of interest that fed on other people's misfortune. Victor Hayes is a particular man, the woman continued, addressing the remaining onlookers more than Nora herself. Can't fault him for knowing what he wants. Mail order arrangements are always a gamble, aren't they? Sometimes the photograph doesn't quite match the reality. The words landed like stones. Nora felt heat crawl up her neck that had nothing to do with the relentless sun. She wanted to speak to defend herself, to explain that the photograph had been taken only 4 months ago and was perfectly accurate, that she was exactly who she'd claimed to be in her letters. But her throat had closed around the words, trapping them somewhere between her heart and her mouth. "Martha, that's enough." An older man in a shopkeeper's apron shot the woman a disapproving look before turning to Nora with something closer to genuine sympathy. "Miss, is there someone we can wire for you, family back east, who could send train fare?" The question kindly meant nearly undid her completely. Nora shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. There was no one. Her parents had died of typhoid fever 2 years ago within days of each other. Her aunt, who'd taken her in afterward, had made it clear that Nora's presence was a burden, another mouth to feed, in a household already stretched thin. The advertisement for mail-order brides had seemed like providence, a chance to build a new life, to be wanted, to matter to someone. "I have a little money," she managed, finally, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. "Perhaps there's a boarding house." "The boarding house is full," Martha interjected, snapping her fan closed with a decisive click. "Miners came through last week, took every bed. And anyway, a young woman alone?" She let the implication hang in the air, laden with judgment. The platform began to empty. The initial spectacle had passed, and people were returning to their lives, their routines, their ordinary Friday afternoon business. Nora watched them go with a detached sort of panic, as if she were observing her own disaster from a great distance. The sun hammered down on the wooden platform, turning the air thick and difficult to breathe. Her carpetbag suddenly felt impossibly heavy, though it contained everything she owned. 2 dresses, a nightgown, undergarments, her mother's Bible, a silver locket, and the bundle of letters from Victor Hayes that had painted a picture of a life she would now never live. She bent slowly and picked up the torn pieces of her photograph, smoothing them against her skirt with fingers that had started to shake. In the picture, she looked hopeful, young and hopeful and stupidly naive. "You should take the evening train back," the shopkeeper said gently. "It comes through at 6. I'm sure Mr. Hayes would at least—" "Mr. Hayes made his position clear, Samuel." Martha had moved closer, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that still carried across the platform. The girl misrepresented herself. "Look at her, she's twice the size of that photograph. He has every right to refuse the arrangement." "I've gained no weight," Nora said quietly, finally finding her voice, even as something inside her began to fracture. "The photograph is accurate. I'm exactly who I claim to be." Martha's eyebrows lifted. "Well, that may be your opinion, dear, but clearly Mr. Hayes sees things differently. These arrangements require honesty, you understand. When a man sends for a bride, he expects—" "What does he expect?" The words came out sharper than Nora intended, propelled by a sudden flame of anger that burned through her shock. "A commodity. A purchase that can be returned if it doesn't meet specifications." Samuel cleared his throat uncomfortably. Martha's face tightened with disapproval. And Nora realized she'd made a mistake. In this moment, in this place, she had no right to anger. She was the rejected bride, the woman found wanting, the outsider who'd arrived with expectations that had proven embarrassingly unfounded. Anger was a luxury she couldn't afford. "I apologize," she said, the words tasting like ash. "I'm not myself." Understandably so. Samuel shifted his weight, clearly wishing to be anywhere else. "Miss, truly the evening train would be your best option. You could be back in Denver by tomorrow. Find work there, perhaps, in one of the hotels." "I don't have fare back to Denver." The admission cost her something, a final stripping away of dignity. She'd used everything she had to come here. The silence that followed and held a different quality. Heavier, more awkward, tinged with the uncomfortable realization that this situation had no easy resolution. Martha made a small sound of impatience and turned away, clearly done with a problem that had become too complicated for her afternoon entertainment. Samuel rubbed his jaw, looking genuinely distressed. "There might be work," he said finally. "Mrs. Chen at the restaurant sometimes needs help, or the hotel might require a chambermaid. It won't be much, but it would be honest work until you could save enough for passage back east." "The hotel won't hire her." Martha had paused at the edge of the platform, turning back with the air of someone delivering an unwelcome truth. "Catherine runs a respectable establishment. She won't take on a woman with this kind of situation attached to her name. The whole town will know about this by supper time, Samuel, and you know it." She was right. They all knew it. In a town this size, Nora could see perhaps 24 buildings from where she stood. Scandal spread like wildfire across dry grass. By evening, everyone would know that Victor Hayes had taken one look at his mail-order bride and rejected her on the platform. The whispers would follow her everywhere. Too plain, too heavy, too something, not enough. Samuel opened his mouth to respond, but movement at the far end of the platform caught Nora's attention. Two figures were approaching a man and a small child. The man moved with the easy ground-covering stride of someone accustomed to walking long distances, his worn hat pulled low against the sun. The child, a girl of perhaps 7, skipped beside him, her hand clasped in his. They reached the platform just as Martha departed with a swish of green skirts, her departure somehow more cutting than her presence. The man paused, taking in the scene with eyes that missed nothing. Nora with her carpetbag and her torn photograph. Samuel's uncomfortable posture, the empty platform, and the lingering atmosphere of witnessed humiliation. "Afternoon, Samuel," he said, his voice carrying the roughness of someone who spent more time with horses than people. "Train on time today." "Caleb!" Samuel's relief at the interruption was palpable. Yes, it was. Just dropped off." He hesitated, clearly unsure how to describe Nora's situation. "I can see what it dropped off." The man Caleb shifted his gaze to Nora, and she found herself meeting eyes that were startling in their directness. Gray as winter sky set in a face weathered by sun and wind. He wasn't old, perhaps 35, but he carried himself with the solid presence of someone who'd earned his place in the world through work rather than charm. "Miss." The child peered around her father's legs, studying Nora with the frank curiosity of the young. She had dark hair in 2 neat braids, and her father's gray eyes, though hers held warmth where his held caution. "Is that lady going to cry, Papa?" the girl whispered, not quite quietly enough. "Lily." The name was gentle but firm, a father's redirection. Nora realized her eyes had indeed filled with tears, though she'd been fighting them back. She blinked rapidly, turning away under the pretense of adjusting her bag. "I should be going," she managed, though she had no idea where she intended to go. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the western mountains, but hours of heat remained. The street beyond the platform offered no obvious sanctuary, just the general store, a saloon, a few other buildings she couldn't identify from this distance. "Just a moment, miss." Caleb's voice stopped her. "Samuel, what's the situation here?" Samuel explained in low tones, though Nora could hear every word. The story sounded even worse in summary: the mail order arrangement, the rejection, the lack of funds or prospects. As he spoke, Caleb's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the set of his shoulders. A tension that might have been anger, or might have been something else entirely. "Victor Hayes did this?" he asked when Samuel finished. "He has every right to refuse if he," Samuel began. "I didn't ask about his rights. I asked if he left a woman stranded with no means and no place to go." Caleb's voice had gone quiet in a way that suggested more threat than shouting ever could. "Where is he now?" "Caleb, don't start something. The situation is regrettable, but it's not your concern." "Like hell it isn't." Caleb looked at Nora again, his gaze moving from her face to her bag to the torn photograph still clutched in her hand. "You have any skills, miss? Can you cook, clean, handle livestock?" The question was so unexpected that Nora could only stare at him for a moment. Yes, I kept house for my aunt. I can cook plain meals. I've tended chickens and—" "My daughter and I live about 5 miles south of here," Caleb interrupted. "Ranch work, cattle, some horses, chickens, a vegetable garden that's mostly dying because I can't tend it proper. My wife passed 2 years ago, and I've been managing poorly ever since." He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, just stating the situation as he might describe the weather. "I could use help. You could use a place to stay. Temporary arrangement until you figure out your next move." Samuel made a sound of protest. "Caleb, that's not— people will talk. A young unmarried woman staying at your ranch. Let them talk. They'll talk anyway about what happened here today." Caleb's jaw tightened. "At least this way, she'll have a roof over her head while they're doing it." Nora's mind reeled, trying to process this sudden shift from complete disaster to unexpected. What rescue? But something in her resisted that word. This man wasn't offering charity. He was proposing an arrangement work in exchange for shelter. It had a dignity to it that pure charity would have lacked. "I would work hard," she heard herself say. "I wouldn't be a burden." "Didn't figure you would be." Caleb's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "But I won't lie to you, it's hard living out there. The work is constant. The house needs everything. And Lily—" He looked down at his daughter with something that might have been helplessness. "She needs things I can't give her: gentleness, teaching, the kind of care a man doesn't know how to provide." Lily tugged on her father's sleeve. Is the lady coming home with us, Papa? That's up to the lady little bird. They both looked at Nora, the taciturn rancher, and his watchful daughter, and Nora realized that this moment, this choice would define everything that came after. She could refuse, could insist on waiting for some other solution, could cling to the idea that surely there was a better option than following a stranger to an isolated ranch. Or she could accept that sometimes providence came in unexpected forms. That pride was another luxury she couldn't afford. That being found wanting by Victor Hayes might have saved her from a far worse fate. I'll come, she said quietly, and I'll earn my keep. I promise you that. Caleb nodded once as if they'd just concluded a business transaction. Wagon's just down the street. We'll get you settled before dark. Wham! As they walked toward town, Lily slipped her small hand into Nora's. The gesture was so natural, so trusting, that Nora felt something crack open in her chest, all the fear and humiliation and desperate uncertainty, finding a small outlet in the warmth of a child's hand. Behind them, Samuel called out something about being careful about considering the propriety of the situation. But his voice faded as they moved away from the platform, away from the sight of Nora's public rejection, toward a future she couldn't begin to imagine. The wagon was exactly what Nora expected, functional and worn-built for work rather than comfort. Caleb lifted Lily into the back with easy strength, then turned to help Nora up. His hands on her waist were brief and impersonal, but even that simple touch felt strange after months of living in her aunt's house, where she'd been treated like an inconvenient ghost. Thank you, she said as she settled onto the hard bench seat, for not leaving me there. Caleb climbed up beside her and gathered the reins. A man who'd leave a woman stranded isn't a man worth knowing. Victor Hayes just showed everyone exactly what he's made of, and it isn't much. They pulled away from town as the afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. Nora watched the buildings recede, watched the platform where her future had shattered, become just another point in the landscape. She thought about Victor Hayes tearing her photograph, about Martha's sharp satisfaction, about the weight of being found wanting. But she also thought about Caleb's quiet anger on her behalf, about Lily's hand in hers, about the possibility, however slim, that sometimes the worst moments open doors to something better. The road south cut through open grassland that rolled away toward distant mountains. The air smelled of sage and dust and something else, a wildness that had no name but that Nora could taste with every breath. The heat pressed down relentlessly, but there was a beauty to it too, a harsh grandeur that made her feel very small and somehow paradoxically less alone. Lily chattered from the back of the wagon, telling Nora about the chickens in the garden and her favorite horse, a gentle mare named Clover. Caleb drove in silence, his attention on the road, but Nora sensed he was listening to his daughter's words with the careful attention of a man who'd learned to treasure them. We had a housekeeper for a while, Lily said suddenly, Mrs. Patterson, but she left because she said Papa was too quiet and the ranch was too lonely. Lily, there was warning in Caleb's voice, but also resignation, the tone of a father who'd learned his daughter would say exactly what she thought regardless of redirection. It's true, Papa. She said you didn't talk enough and there was nothing to do except work. Lily leaned forward, her small face appearing between Nora and Caleb. Are you going to leave too? The question was so direct, so vulnerably honest that Nora felt her throat tighten. I don't know what the future holds, she said carefully, but I'm here now and I'll work as hard as I can for as long as I stay. It was the only honest answer she could give. And Lily seemed to accept it, settling back into the wagon bed, humming a tuneless song that drifted away on the hot wind. They traveled in silence for a long stretch, the only sounds the creak of the wagon, the steady clip of hooves, and the occasional call of a bird from the scrubland. Nora felt the last of her adrenaline fade, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that made even sitting upright feel like an effort. The morning's hope had curdled into afternoon's humiliation, and now evening's strange new reality. Her mind kept trying to process it all, but the pieces wouldn't fit together into anything coherent. You'll have your own room, Caleb said, finally breaking the silence. It's not much use to be storage, but it has a window and a bed. You'll take meals with us. Work will be sunrise to sundown most days, Sundays off, except for essential chores. He was outlining terms, establishing boundaries, making sure she understood this was an employment arrangement and nothing else. Nora appreciated the clarity, the lack of ambiguity. After the chaos of the day, there was comfort in simple, direct communication. That's more than fair, she said. It's what's right. Caleb glanced at her briefly, then back to the road. I won't have people saying I took advantage of your situation. You work, you get room and board. We'll figure out wages once I see what you can do. That agreeable? Yes. Another stretch of silence then. About what happened back there with Hayes. Caleb's jaw worked as if he was choosing his words carefully. What he did was cruelty, plain and simple. Had nothing to do with you and everything to do with him being a small man with a smaller heart. I want you to know that. The unexpected kindness in his words nearly undid her. Nora stared straight ahead, willing herself not to cry, not to fall apart now, when she'd managed to hold herself together through everything else. He looked at me like I was livestock that didn't meet standards, she said quietly. Then he's a fool. Caleb said it's simply a statement of fact rather than comfort. A woman's worth isn't in her face or her figure. It's in her character, her strength, what she does when life gets hard. He paused. You stood on that platform with everyone watching, no money, no prospects, and you didn't fall apart. That tells me more about who you are than any photograph ever could. Nora did cry then, but quietly letting the tears slip down her face without wiping them away. They were different from the tears she'd fought back earlier. These weren't tears of humiliation, but of something like relief, or perhaps just the release of tension she hadn't known she was carrying. Lily started singing again from the back of the wagon, something about mockingbirds and diamond rings, her child's voice pure and unself-conscious. The sun continued its descent, painting the grassland in deeper shades of gold. And Nora Brennan, who'd started the day expecting to become someone's wife, let herself cry for the future she'd lost while riding toward a future she couldn't yet imagine, held together by nothing more than a stranger's unexpected kindness and a child's small hand. Bye. The ranch appeared as the sun touched the western mountains, a cluster of buildings that looked weathered but solid, built to withstand seasons and storms. The main house was larger than Nora expected, 2 stories of dark wood with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. A barn stood off to one side, and beyond it she could see a corral, several smaller outbuildings, and the neat rows of what must be the struggling vegetable garden Caleb had mentioned. As they drew closer, Nora could see the signs of a place where one man was trying to do the work of 3 fences that needed mending, shutters that hung slightly askew, weeds encroaching on the garden beds. But there was also evidence of care. The barn was well maintained. The animals in the corral looked healthy, and despite the wear, everything had the air of a working ranch rather than a neglected one. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop near the house and helped first Lily, then Nora down. The child immediately ran toward the barn, calling out to the horses. Caleb watched her go with an expression Nora was learning to recognize. Love mixed with a kind of helpless uncertainty, as if he was never quite sure he was raising her right. Come on, he said, picking up Nora's carpetbag. I'll show you around. The house was dim and cool after the bright heat outside. Nora's eyes adjusted slowly, revealing a large main room that served as kitchen and living area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and rough-hewn furniture, a table, chairs, a worn sofa filled the space. Everything was clean but spare, functional rather than comfortable. There were no curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, none of the small touches that made a house feel like a home. Kitchen's there, obviously. Caleb gestured to the area where a cast-iron stove stood beside shelves of basic supplies. Pumps out back for water. Pantry stocked well enough, though I'm no cook, so meals have been simple. He led her up a narrow staircase to the second floor where 3 doors opened off a small hallway. Lily's room, my room, and this one here. He opened the third door, revealing a small space with a single bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. It wasn't much, barely large enough for the furniture it contained, but it had a window with real glass and a door that closed, and that was more privacy than Nora had had in her aunt's house, where she'd slept in a corner of the attic. It's perfect, she said quietly. Thank you. When she turned, Caleb was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You've had a hell of a day, he said. Why don't you rest for a bit, get yourself settled? I'll call you when supper's ready. But Nora shook her head. I'd rather work if it's all the same to you. I think I need to do something useful. Understanding flickered across Caleb's face. He nodded. All right then, let's start with supper. Show me what you can do with beans and salt pork. They went back downstairs together, and Nora surveyed the kitchen with the practiced eye of someone who'd been cooking since she was tall enough to reach the stove. The basics were there, good cookware, though it needed a thorough cleaning, adequate supplies, even some herbs hanging dried near the window. She could work with this. As she tied on an apron she found hanging on a peg and began pulling out what she needed, Caleb leaned against the doorframe watching. You know what you're doing, he observed. I kept house for my aunt and her family. 7 people total, all of them particular about their meals. Nora began slicing salt pork with efficient movements. I learned young that if you want peace, you make sure the food is good. Your aunt, she treated you well. The question was casual, but Nora sensed the weight behind it. She considered lying smoothing over the truth with platitudes about family duty and gratitude. But something about this man's direct honesty seemed to demand the same in return. She gave me a place to live after my parents died. I'm grateful for that. Nora focused on the salt pork, cutting it into precise cubes. But no, she didn't treat me well. I was convenient free labor, someone to mind the children and do the washing and disappear when company came because I was a poor relation, and that reflected badly. The words came out more bitter than she intended. Nora moved to the stove, stoking the fire, channeling her emotions into the knife work. So you took the first escape you could find, Caleb said softly, even if it meant marrying a stranger. Even if it meant that. Nora moved to the stove, stoking the fire. I thought it would be a fresh start, a chance to build something of my own, to matter to someone. And instead you got Victor Hayes. Instead, I got humiliated in front of half the town. Nora's hands stilled on the skillet. Do you know him, Hayes? Well enough to know you're better off without him? Caleb's voice had gone hard again. He runs a feed store, thinks highly of himself, treats his employees poorly. Word is he's been through 2 mail-order arrangements before this one. First woman got here and found out he'd lied about owning his business. Turned out he just managed it for his uncle. She left on the next train. Second one stayed for 3 months, then ran off with a ranch hand. Nora absorbed this, trying to reconcile it with the man who'd so carefully composed letters about building a life together, about wanting a partner, about being lonely in this big country. He wrote such nice letters, she said quietly. I imagine he did. Some men are better on paper than in person. Caleb pushed off from the doorframe. I'll let you work. Holler if you need anything. He left her alone in the kitchen, and Nora let herself sink into the familiar rhythm of cooking. She fried the salt pork until it was crisp, then used the fat to saute wild onions she found in the pantry. Beans that had been soaking went into a pot with water, some of the dried herbs, a pinch of precious sugar to cut the bitterness. While it all simmered, she made biscuits from flour, lard, and buttermilk, her hands remembering the proportions her mother had taught her years ago. As she worked, Lily wandered in and out, fascinated by the activity. The girl was obviously starved for female company, asking questions about everything: where Nora was from, what Philadelphia was like, whether she knew any songs, whether she could braid hair better than Papa could. Papa tries, Lily confided, perching on a chair to watch Nora roll out biscuit dough. But his fingers are too big and the braids always come loose. Sometimes I do them myself, but they're all crooked. I could braid your hair tomorrow morning if you'd like, Nora offered. Lily's face lit up with such pure joy that Nora felt her battered heart expand slightly. This child at least wanted her here. This child didn't find her lacking. Supper was ready as the last light faded from the sky. Nora called Caleb in from whatever work he'd been doing in the barn, and they sat down together at the rough table, the taciturn rancher, his talkative daughter, and the woman who'd been rejected that afternoon and somehow impossibly found herself here. Caleb took his first bite of beans and went still. He looked at Nora, something like surprise crossing his features. This is good, he said, really good. It's just beans and salt pork. It's the first meal I've had in 2 years that tasted like something worth eating. He took another bite and another. Mrs. Patterson couldn't cook worth a damn, and I'm worse. We've been surviving on charred meat and burnt biscuits for a long while. Lily nodded enthusiastically, her mouth full. When she swallowed, she announced, Papa makes everything taste like smoke. I do not. You do, Papa. Even the eggs taste like smoke. Despite everything, the exhaustion, the lingering humiliation, the strangeness of being in this place with these people, Nora found herself smiling. There was something deeply normal about this exchange, something grounding about sitting at a table and sharing a meal while a child teased her father. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that came not from having nothing to say but from being tired and hungry and focused on the food. When they finished, Nora stood to clear the dishes, but Caleb stopped her with a raised hand. You cooked. Lily and I will clean up. That's how it works here, everyone contributes. So Nora watched as the big rancher and his small daughter worked together to clear the table and wash the dishes, their movements practiced and comfortable. Lily stood on a stool to reach the washing basin, and Caleb dried with a dish towel, and the simple domesticity of it all made Nora's eyes sting with tears she didn't quite understand. When the kitchen was clean, Caleb sent Lily upstairs to get ready for bed. The girl hugged Nora goodnight, a fierce, spontaneous embrace that nearly knocked Nora backward before thundering up the stairs with the unself-conscious noise of a happy child. Alone with Caleb again, Nora felt suddenly awkward. The evening had taken on an intimacy she hadn't anticipated. Sitting at his table, feeding his child, watching him move through his home. She was a stranger here, she reminded herself. An employee, nothing more. "You must be exhausted," Caleb said, seeming to sense her discomfort. "Tomorrow will be soon enough to talk about work. Tonight, just rest." "Thank you." Nora hesitated, then asked the question that had been building since they left town. "Why did you help me? You don't know anything about me. I could be anyone." Caleb considered this, his gray eyes thoughtful in the lamplight. "My wife," he said finally. "She came west as a mail-order bride, too. That's how we met. She arrived in town with nothing but a carpetbag and a lot of hope. And her intended had died 2 weeks before influenza. She was stranded same as you, and if someone hadn't helped her..." He paused, his throat working. "She was the best thing that ever happened to me. When I saw you on that platform today, I saw her. I saw what could have happened if no one had stepped in." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with memory and loss. Nora understood then that this offer of refuge was about more than kindness. It was about honoring the memory of someone who'd needed help once and received it. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "about your wife." "So am I." Caleb turned away, but not before Nora saw the flash of pain across his face. "Get some rest. Morning comes early on the ranch." Nora climbed the stairs to her small room, her body finally beginning to register the full weight of the day's events. She changed into her nightgown, washed her face with water from the pitcher on the dresser, and sat on the edge of the narrow bed. Through the window, she could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, more stars than she'd ever seen in Philadelphia, scattered across the heavens like diamonds on velvet. Somewhere out there was the town where she'd been rejected. Somewhere out there was Victor Hayes, probably already forgetting the woman he'd dismissed. And somewhere out there was the future she'd imagined dissolving like mist. But here in this small room, in this weathered ranch house, was a different kind of future. Uncertain and undefined, built on nothing more solid than a stranger's kindness and a child's need. Nora wasn't naive enough to think this arrangement would last forever, or that she'd found some fairy tale ending to her disaster. But for tonight, she had a bed and a roof and the lingering warmth of being treated with basic human decency. It was enough. For now, it was enough. She lay down and closed her eyes, and despite everything, despite the trauma and uncertainty and fear, she fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by loss and lulled by the unfamiliar sounds of this new place. Wind in the grass, the distant lowing of cattle, and below her window, the quiet footsteps of a man checking the locks and banking the fire before heading to his own lonely bed. The summer heat would continue. The work would be hard. The future remained unclear. But Nora Brennan had survived the worst day of her life, and in surviving it had somehow found the first threads of something that might eventually feel like home. Nora woke to unfamiliar sounds, the low of cattle, the creak of floorboards below, and bird song that seemed to come from every direction at once. For a moment she lay disoriented in the pre-dawn darkness, unable to place herself. Then memory returned in a cold rush. The platform, the torn photograph, Victor Hayes's dismissive glance. She sat up quickly, as if movement could outrun the shame that came with remembering. Through the window, the sky was beginning to lighten at the edges, turning from black to deep blue. Nora dressed quickly in the dim light, choosing her older work dress and pinning her hair back with shaking fingers. Her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser showed a face that looked hollowed out by exhaustion, dark circles under eyes that seemed too large. She looked away. Downstairs, she found Caleb already in the kitchen, attempting to start the stove with the grim determination of a man who'd failed at this task many times before. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his weathered features. "Didn't expect you up this early," he said. "I'm used to early mornings." Nora moved toward the stove without thinking, years of household routine taking over. "Let me." She had the fire going properly within minutes, working with practiced efficiency while Caleb watched from the doorway. The kitchen began to warm as she pulled out flour and eggs, moving through the space as if taking inventory of its possibilities. "Coffee's in the blue tin," Caleb offered. "Though fair warning, I make it strong enough to strip paint." "Strong is fine." Nora found the tin and measured grounds into the pot, adding water from the pump. When it began to brew, the smell filled the kitchen, bitter and rich and somehow comforting in its normalcy. "When does Lily wake?" she asked, slicing salt pork for breakfast. "Depends on the day. Sometimes dawn, sometimes not, till the sun's well up." He paused. "She'll want those braids you promised." The simple statement carried unexpected weight, a reminder that Nora's words mattered here, that someone was counting on her to keep them. She nodded, focusing on her work. They worked in companionable silence, Caleb eventually settling at the table with his coffee while Nora cooked. The eastern sky turned gold, then pink light spilling through the windows and illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. There was something peaceful about this hour, Nora thought. Something that felt suspended between yesterday's disaster and whatever today would bring. Lily appeared as Nora was plating eggs and fried pork, the girl's hair a wild tangle around her sleep-flushed face. She climbed into her father's lap without preamble, burying her face in his shoulder. "Morning, little bird," Caleb murmured, his voice gentle in a way that transformed his whole presence. Nora made breakfast. Lily peered at the table, then at Nora as if testing whether yesterday had been real or dreamed. "You stayed." "I did." "Good." Lily slid from her father's lap and into her own chair with the decisive air of someone who'd made an important decision. "Can you really braid hair?" After breakfast, Nora sat Lily on a stool near the window and carefully worked through the tangles in the child's dark hair. Caleb had left for the barn, but Nora could hear him moving around outside, the sounds of morning chores beginning. She separated Lily's hair into sections, her fingers remembering the motions her mother had taught her long ago. "Mama used to do this," Lily said quietly. "But I don't remember it very well. Just the feeling, sort of, like being safe." Nora's hands stilled for a moment. "How old were you when she passed?" 4.5. "Papa says I look like her, but I don't remember her face exactly, just pieces. Her singing, the way she smelled like bread and soap." Lily's voice was matter-of-fact, but Nora heard the loss underneath. "Do you miss your mama?" "Every day." Nora resumed braiding, making each plait tight and even. "She died when I was 16. My father, too." "That's sad." Lily was quiet for a moment, then, "Papa gets sad sometimes. He tries to hide it, but I can tell. He goes real quiet and his eyes look far away." The child's perceptiveness caught Nora off guard. She finished the first braid and started on the second, choosing her words carefully. "Losing someone you love is hard. It takes a long time to stop hurting. Has it stopped hurting for you?" "Not completely, but it hurts less than it used to." Lily absorbed this, tilting her head to examine her reflection in the window glass. "Will Papa stop hurting someday?" "I think so. People are stronger than they know." When both braids were finished, Lily jumped down and ran to the small mirror hanging near the door, turning her head from side to side to admire the work. "They're perfect. They're so neat and pretty, and they're not crooked at all." She spun around, her whole face lit with joy. "Can you do them every morning?" "We'll see," Nora said, unwilling to make promises about a future she couldn't predict. "For now, why don't you show me that garden your papa mentioned?" The vegetable garden was indeed struggling. Nora surveyed the rows with a critical eye, noting the weeds choking the bean plants, the tomatoes desperate for water, the squash vines wilting in soil that had gone hard and cracked. But underneath the neglect, she could see the bones of a good garden. Someone had laid it out well, had known what they were doing. "Mama planted this," Lily said, echoing Nora's thoughts. "Papa keeps trying, but he says plants don't like him the way they liked her." "Plants don't like or dislike anyone. They just need the right care." Nora knelt beside a struggling tomato plant, testing the soil with her fingers. Dry as dust. "They need water and weeding and attention. Your papa has been doing the work of 3 people." Something had to give. She stood shading her eyes against the climbing sun as she looked around the property. Beyond the garden, she could see the chicken coop, the barn where Caleb had disappeared, the corral, where several horses stood in drowsy morning contentment. It was a good piece of land, well situated, and clearly once well tended. The evidence of decline was everywhere. A fence section, sagging shutters hanging askew, the porch steps worn and splintering. But it wasn't beyond saving, not yet. "Can you fix it?" Lily asked, watching Nora with eyes too old for her young face. "The garden, I mean. Can you make it like it was—" "I can try," Nora met the child's gaze. "But it will take work, a lot of work. I can help. I'm a very good helper. Papa says so." Despite everything, Nora found herself smiling. "Then we better get started." They worked through the morning as the summer heat built, Nora pulling weeds while Lily hauled water in a bucket she could barely carry. The child was indeed a good helper, tireless and cheerful, chattering constantly about the ranch, her father, the horses, and a dozen other topics that seemed to have no particular order or connection. Nora listened with half her attention while her hands fell into the rhythm of the work. Pull toss, the weeds coming up in satisfying clumps. Caleb appeared around mid-morning, his shirt dark with sweat and his hat pushed back. He stopped at the edge of the garden, taking in the neat rows Nora had already cleared the pile of weeds, wilting in the sun. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I hired you for housework, not field work." Nora sat back on her heels, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. A garden is a garden. Seems a shame to let it die when it could be saved. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, then nodded slowly. "Water barrels around back. Pump's been working steady. You need anything else, come find me in the barn." As he turned to go, Nora called out, "Mr. Mercer." He paused, looking back. "What should I call you, Mr. Mercer? Seems too formal for someone living in your house." "Caleb's fine." He shifted his weight as if the informality made him uncomfortable. "We're not formal people out here." "Caleb, then." Nora tested the name, finding it fit him solid and unpretentious. "And I'm Nora." "I know." Something that might have been humor flickered in his eyes. "You told me yesterday on the platform." He left before she could respond, his long strides carrying him back toward the barn. Lily giggled, covering her mouth with dirty hands. "Papa's being shy. He's not used to ladies." "I'm not a lady. I'm just someone who needed help." "You're a lady to me." Lily picked up her bucket with renewed determination. "Come on, the tomatoes are thirsty." By midday, Nora had cleared 3 full rows and watered everything she'd uncovered. Her back ached, her hands were filthy, and her dress was soaked with sweat. But the garden looked measurably better. She could see the potential, now could imagine what it might look like in a few weeks with proper care, neat rows of vegetables, vines heavy with produce, the earth dark and healthy. She sent Lily to wash up and headed inside to start dinner, moving through the hot kitchen with mechanical efficiency. Her mind kept returning to the platform, to Victor Hayes's dismissive glance, to the weight of being found wanting. But each time the memory threatened to overwhelm her, she forced her attention back to the present. The onions she was chopping, the bread dough she was kneading, the simple fact of being here, doing something useful, mattering in some small way. Dinner was beans and cornbread served at the rough table, while the afternoon heat pressed against the windows. Caleb ate with the single-minded focus of someone who viewed food as fuel rather than pleasure, but he cleaned his plate and accepted seconds without comment. Lily kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling her father about everything they'd accomplished in the garden. "Nora says the tomatoes will have fruit soon if we keep watering them," the girl reported. "And the beans aren't dead, they're just sad. We're going to make them happy again." "Is that so?" Caleb's gaze shifted to Nora. "You know about gardens? My mother had one. I helped her tend it from the time I was small." Nora broke off a piece of cornbread, remembering her mother's hands in the soil, her patient instruction. "A garden is like anything else, it responds to attention. Neglect it and it dies, but give it consistent care and it thrives." "Sounds like raising children," Caleb said quietly, "or building a life." Nora hadn't meant to say it, but the words came anyway. You can't abandon something and expect it to flourish. The statement hung in the air, heavier than she'd intended. Caleb's expression shifted, something complicated, moving behind his eyes, recognition perhaps, or understanding of all the things she wasn't saying. "About yesterday, about being abandoned, about trying to build something from nothing." "No," he agreed finally, "you can't." But then, after dinner, Nora cleaned the kitchen, while Caleb disappeared to handle afternoon chores. Lily settled at the table with a slate and chalk, practicing letters with fierce concentration. Nora watched her from the corner of her eye as she worked, noting the way the child formed each character with painstaking care, her tongue caught between her teeth. "Do you go to school?" Nora asked. Lily shook her head without looking up. "There's a school in town, but Papa says it's too far to ride every day, especially in winter. Mrs. Patterson taught me some, but she wasn't very patient. She said I was slow." "May I see?" Lily pushed the slate across the table, her expression anxious. Nora studied the letters. They were wobbly but recognizable, showing effort, if not expertise. For a child who'd had inconsistent instruction, they were actually quite good. "You're not slow," Nora said firmly. "You just need practice. Would you like help?" The girl's face transformed with hope. "Really, you'd teach me?" "I'm not a real teacher, but I can show you what I know." They spent the next hour working together, Nora gently correcting Lily's letter formation, while the afternoon light slanted through the windows. It was peaceful work, quieter than the garden, but equally satisfying. The child was bright and eager, soaking up instruction like dry ground soaking up rain. When Caleb returned, he found them bent over the slate together, Lily carefully copying a simple sentence Nora had written. He stopped in the doorway and Nora looked up to find him watching them with an expression she couldn't decipher, something between gratitude and pain, as if the simple domestic scene touched a wound he'd been trying to ignore. "Time for chores, little bird," he said quietly. Lily groaned but obeyed, sliding from her chair with the dramatic reluctance of childhood. "Can we do more letters tomorrow?" she asked Nora. "If your father doesn't mind." "I don't mind." Caleb's voice was rough. "Come on, Lily. Chickens need feeding." Father and daughter headed out together, and Nora watched them through the window. The tall man and the small girl moving in comfortable synchronization toward the chicken coop. There was love in every gesture, in the way Caleb automatically adjusted his stride to match Lily's shorter steps, in the way the child looked up at her father with absolute trust. Nora turned away, fighting an unexpected ache in her chest. She thought she was past wanting things for herself, past hoping for connection and belonging. But watching Caleb and Lily together stirred something she tried to bury: the longing to be part of something, to matter to someone, to build a life that meant more than just surviving day to day. She shook her head, clearing away the dangerous thoughts. She was here temporarily until she could figure out her next move. Getting attached, letting herself hope that way, lay only more heartbreak. Ma! The evening passed in quiet routine. After chores, they had a light supper of leftover cornbread and milk. Lily was tired, her earlier energy fading as the day's heat finally began to break. Caleb sent her to bed early, and Nora heard him upstairs, his deep voice reading something that made Lily giggle. When he came back down, Nora was finishing the dishes, the kitchen clean and ready for tomorrow. Caleb poured himself coffee from the pot that was always simmering on the stove and settled into one of the chairs by the fireplace, his posture showing the bone-deep weariness of hard physical labor. "She likes you," he said without preamble. Nora dried her hands on a towel, unsure how to respond. "She's a sweet child. She doesn't take to people easily. Mrs. Patterson was here 3 months, and Lily never warmed to her." He stared into his coffee cup. Her mother dying, it made her cautious. "She doesn't trust that people will stay." "Can you blame her?" The words came out before Nora could stop them. Caleb looked up sharply, then nodded slowly. "No, I can't." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "I want you to know that you can stay as long as you need to. Even if the work doesn't, even if this arrangement doesn't suit you, I won't turn you out without prospects." Nora moved to the other chair, sitting carefully as if sudden movement might break the fragile honesty of the moment. "Why are you being so kind to me?" "It's not kindness. It's basic human decency." His jaw tightened. "What Hayes did yesterday, leaving you stranded, that was cruelty. I won't add to it. You barely know me." "I know enough." He met her eyes directly. "I know you stood on that platform with half the town watching and didn't fall apart. I know you've been working since dawn without complaint. I know my daughter hasn't smiled that much in 2 years. He paused. "That's enough." Nora felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot of fear she'd been carrying since the platform. "I won't take advantage of your generosity." "Didn't think you would." Caleb drained his coffee and stood. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." He headed upstairs, leaving Nora alone in the quiet kitchen. Through the open windows, she could hear the night sounds of the ranch cattle settling, a horse nickering softly, the distant call of an owl. The unfamiliar sounds should have made her feel more alone, more displaced. Instead, they felt oddly comforting, as if the land itself was breathing around her. She climbed the stairs to her small room and changed into her nightgown, exhaustion finally catching up with her. But as she lay in bed, watching moonlight paint patterns on the wall, her mind wouldn't quiet. She kept thinking about Lily's joy over neat braids, about Caleb's rough kindness, about the garden responding to water and care, about the possibility, however fragile, that maybe she'd found a place where she could be useful, where her presence added something rather than simply taking up space. It wasn't the future she'd imagined when she boarded the train 3 weeks ago, but perhaps it was something better than that, something real, built on honest work and mutual need rather than romantic fantasy. The days developed a rhythm. Nora woke before dawn and made breakfast while Caleb handled the early barn work. After they ate, she'd spend the morning in the garden or tackling the endless domestic tasks the house required. Washing, mending, cleaning spaces that hadn't seen proper attention in 2 years. Afternoons were devoted to Lily's lessons and preparing supper, while evenings passed in quiet routine until darkness sent everyone to bed exhausted by honest labor. The work was relentless, harder than anything Nora had done in her aunt's house. But there was a satisfaction to it that she'd never felt before. In Philadelphia, she'd worked to avoid criticism, to stay invisible, to earn her keep in a household that made clear she was barely tolerated. Here, every task she completed made a visible difference. The garden flourished under her care, neat rows of vegetables pushing through the soil with renewed vigor. The house slowly transformed from bare functionality to something approaching comfort: curtains. She sewed from old fabric rugs. She beat clean and repositioned small touches that made the space feel lived in rather than simply occupied. Caleb watched these changes with quiet approval, occasionally offering help, but mostly letting Nora work at her own pace. He was a man of few words, communicating as much through silence as speech. But Nora learned to read him: the slight softening around his eyes, when he was pleased, the tightness in his jaw when something troubled him, the way he'd stand at the window, staring at nothing when the weight of memory became too heavy. A week passed, then another. The routine became comfortable. The work became familiar. And Nora found herself thinking less about Victor Hayes and what might have been. The shame of that day on the platform still burned when she let herself remember it, but out here on the ranch, surrounded by work and purpose, it mattered less. She was making something here, building something. And that simple fact carried its own kind of healing. It was Lily who asked the question Nora had been avoiding. They were working in the garden together, Nora weeding while the child watered, when Lily said, "Are you going to stay forever?" Nora's hands stilled in the soil. "I don't know, honey. This was always meant to be temporary." "But you like it here, don't you? You smile more now than when you first came." The observation caught Nora off guard. She sat back on her heels, looking at the child's earnest face. "I do like it here. Very much." "Then why would you leave?" It was a child's logic, simple and direct, seeing no reason why liking something wouldn't automatically lead to keeping it. Nora struggled to find words that would make sense without crushing the hope she saw in those gray eyes so like Caleb's. "Sometimes life is more complicated than just liking or not liking something," she said finally. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go. Your father gave me shelter when I needed it, but that doesn't mean this is my home forever. It could be, though." Lily set down her bucket with a thump. "You could stay and be part of our family, like Mama was." "Oh, sweetheart." Nora's throat tightened. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because I'm still the woman who was rejected on that platform," Nora thought. "Because your father doesn't want a wife, he wants help with his ranch. Because I've learned not to hope for things that seem too good to be true." Asterisk. But she couldn't say any of that to a 7-year-old girl who'd already lost too much. "We'll see," she said instead, the universal parental deflection. "For now, let's focus on these tomatoes. They're almost ready to pick." Lily accepted the redirection with the resilience of childhood, but Nora saw her casting sidelong glances throughout the rest of the afternoon as if trying to decipher something in Nora's face. That evening, the child was quieter than usual, and when Caleb took her up for bed, Nora heard the murmur of serious conversation through the floorboards. When Caleb came back down, he didn't sit but stood by the window, his back to Nora, tension visible in his shoulders. "Lily asked you to stay," he said, finally. It wasn't a question. "Yes? And you told her you didn't know what the future held. That's honest, at least." He turned, his expression troubled. "She's getting attached. I should have seen it coming. Should I? Should I pull back, spend less time with her?" "No." The word came out sharply, then softer. "No, that would hurt her more. She needs—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "She needs exactly what you've been giving her. Attention, teaching someone who treats her like she matters." "She does matter. I know that, but I can't give her everything she needs. I'm trying, but I'm just—" He trailed off, the sentence unfinished but the meaning clear. Nora stood, moving closer but maintaining careful distance. "You're a good father, Caleb. She adores you. She needs more than adoration. She needs a mother." The words seemed dragged from somewhere deep, and I can't give her that. The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of the clock and the soft sounds of the summer night beyond the windows. Nora felt the weight of unspoken things pressing against the air between them, the complicated tangle of need and grief and the simple human longing for connection. "I don't know how long I can stay," she said quietly. "I don't know what I'm building toward or where I'll end up. But while I'm here, I'll care for her as best I can." Caleb nodded slowly, something like relief crossing his features. "That's all I'm asking." But Nora suspected it wasn't all he was asking, just all he could bring himself to say. She suspected there was more beneath the surface: questions about the future, about possibility, about whether this temporary arrangement might become something else. She suspected it because she felt it too. The dangerous pull of wanting this to be more than it was, of imagining a future that included this ranch, this child, this silent man with his weathered hands and careful heart. But wanting and having were different things, and Nora had learned that lesson too well to forget it now. The heat arrived 3 days later, like something physical. a weight that pressed down on the land and refused to lift. Nora woke to air that felt thick even in the pre-dawn darkness, the kind of heat that promised worse to come. By the time she had breakfast ready, sweat already dampened her collar despite the early hour. Caleb came in from the barn looking grim. "Going to be a bad one," he said, accepting the coffee she poured. "Cattle will need extra water. I'll be out most of the day." "What about Lily?" Nora glanced toward the stairs where the child still slept. "Keep her inside as much as possible. Heat like this can drop a grown man, let alone a child." He drained his cup in 3 long swallows. "You should stay in too. The garden can wait." But Nora had already learned that nothing on a ranch could truly wait. After Caleb left, she checked the garden in the relative cool of early morning watering, quickly before the sun climbed higher. The plants were already wilting leaves curling inward against the heat. She gave them as much water as she dared, knowing the well wouldn't run dry, but conscious of not wasting what might be needed elsewhere. By mid-morning, the house had become an oven despite every window being open. Nora moved through her tasks, slowly conserving energy, while Lily sprawled on the floor with her slate too listless even for her usual chatter. The child's face was flushed, her dark hair damp at the temples. "I'm hot, Nora," she complained, not for the first time. "I know, sweetheart. Here, drink some more water." Nora pressed a cup into the girl's hands, watching to make sure she drank it all. The heat was oppressive, turning the air soupy and hard to breathe. Through the window, she could see the land shimmering, distorted by waves of heat rising from the baked earth. Caleb came in briefly at noon, his shirt soaked through his face, dark red from sun and exertion. He drank 3 dippers of water without pausing, then splashed more over his head and neck. "How are you managing?" Nora asked, alarmed by how depleted he looked. "I've worked through worse," but his hand shook slightly as he set down the dipper. "2 of the cattle are down heat exhaustion. I got them to shade and water, but—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Nora understood the unspoken reality of ranch life. Sometimes animals died despite your best efforts, and there was nothing to be done but keep working. He left again without eating, and Nora watched him go with growing concern. The heat showed no sign of breaking, and if anything, the afternoon promised to be even more brutal. She tried to focus on indoor tasks, but her attention kept drifting to the windows, tracking Caleb's movements across the ranch as he worked with dogged determination through the crushing heat. Around 3 o'clock, Lily started complaining of a headache. Nora felt the child's forehead warm, but that could just be the heat. She made Lily drink more water, then led her upstairs where it was marginally cooler and settled her on the bed with strict instructions to rest. "I don't want to rest," Lily protested, but her voice lacked its usual force. "Just for a little while. Close your eyes." Nora sat beside her, gently stroking the girl's damp hair back from her forehead. Within minutes, Lily had drifted into uneasy sleep. Nora stayed there, watching her unease building in her chest. Something about the child's color worried her, a flush that seemed deeper than just heat. She told herself she was being overcautious, that it was natural for Lily to be tired in this weather. But the worry persisted, a small cold spot in her mind despite the suffocating heat. When Lily woke an hour later, she was crying. "My head hurts," she whimpered, "and my tummy feels funny." Nora's hand went to the child's forehead again, and this time there was no mistaking it. Lily was burning up fever, unmistakable and climbing fast. "It's all right, sweetheart. You're going to be fine." Nora kept her voice calm even as her heart rate kicked up. She'd nursed her siblings through childhood illnesses, had helped her mother tend sick neighbors. She knew what to do. But knowing and doing while alone in an isolated ranch house in the middle of a heat wave were very different things. She got Lily out of her dress and into a light nightgown, then brought up a basin of cool water and cloths. As she worked sponging the child's burning skin, her mind raced through possibilities. It could be nothing, a summer fever that would break by morning. Or it could be something worse. Scarlet fever, typhoid, the diseases that swept through communities and took children despite every prayer and remedy. "Where's Papa?" Lily asked, her voice small and frightened. "He's working. He'll be back soon." Nora wrung out the cloth and laid it across Lily's forehead. "You just rest now. I'm going to take care of you." The afternoon crawled by in a haze of heat and growing fear. Nora changed the cloths constantly, trying to bring down the fever that showed no sign of breaking. Lily drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid enough to ask for water, sometimes mumbling words that made no sense. Each time Nora checked her temperature with a hand to her forehead, the child seemed hotter. When Caleb finally came in as the sun was setting, Nora met him at the stairs, her face tight with worry. "It's Lily," she said without preamble. "She has a fever, a bad one." The color drained from Caleb's sun-reddened face. He took the stairs two at a time, Nora following close behind. How long? His voice was hoarse. Since mid-afternoon, I've been trying to cool her down, but the fever won't break. Caleb's jaw worked, and Nora saw real fear in his eyes. The kind of terror that came from having already lost one person and facing the possibility of losing another. I need to ride for the doctor. It's 20 miles to town. In this heat at night, Nora caught herself. Of course he knew the risks. How long would it take? 3 hours there if I push hard, 3 back plus however long to find Doc Morrison and convince him to come. Caleb stood abruptly, moving toward the door. 6, 7 hours maybe if nothing goes wrong. That's too long. The words came out before Nora could stop them. Caleb looked at her. She doesn't have 6 hours. He turned back, and the raw anguish in his face nearly broke Nora's composure. Then what do I do? The question wasn't rhetorical. It was a plea from a man who'd reached the end of his knowledge and found it wanting. Nora moved to the bed, looking down at Lily's flushed face. The child's eyes were closed, her small chest rising and falling too quickly. In the lamplight, her skin had taken on an alarming sheen, and when Nora touched her, the heat was shocking. We fight it here, she said, hearing the determination in her own voice. We keep cooling her down, keep getting fluids in her when she's conscious enough to drink. We don't sleep, we don't stop, we just keep fighting until the fever breaks, or she couldn't finish that sentence. Or until morning, Caleb said grimly. If she's no better by first light, I ride for the doctor regardless. They worked together through the evening and into the night, falling into a rhythm without needing to discuss it. Nora sponged Lily's burning skin while Caleb went to fetch fresh water cold from the well. When Lily was conscious, they coaxed water between her lips, a sip at a time. When she slipped into fevered sleep, they watched her breathe, counting each rise and fall of her small chest. The house creaked and settled around them as the day's heat finally began to dissipate. Through the open window, Nora could hear the normal sounds of the ranch cattle lowing horses moving in the corral, the distant call of a coyote. The everyday sounds felt obscene somehow, as if the world had no right to continue normally while a child fought for her life. Around midnight, Lily's fever spiked higher. She began to shake despite the heat, her teeth chattering as her body convulsed with chills that made no sense in the sweltering room. Nora wrapped her in a light blanket while Caleb paced his hands, clenching and unclenching at his sides. This is how it started with Catherine, he said suddenly, his voice rough. Fever that came on fast. She said it was nothing, just a summer cold. 2 days later, He stopped, unable to finish. Nora looked up from where she knelt beside Lily's bed. This isn't the same. Lily is young and strong. She's going to fight through this. You can't know that. No, but I can believe it. And so can you. She reached for his hand, gripping it hard enough that he had no choice but to look at her. She needs you to believe it, Caleb. She needs to feel that you think she's strong enough to survive this. Something shifted in his face, the paralysis of fear giving way to grim determination. He nodded once and knelt beside Nora, his hand joining hers on Lily's burning forehead. Listen to me, little bird, he said softly. I know you're fighting hard right now. I know it hurts and you're scared, but you're a Mercer, and Mercers don't give up. Your mama didn't give up, and neither will you. You hear me? You keep fighting. Lily's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused but aware. Papa, she whispered. I'm here, I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. The hours blurred together in a haze of heat and fear and relentless repetition. Change the cloth, check her temperature, coax and more water. Nora's back ached from kneeling. Her arms trembled with fatigue, but she didn't stop. Caleb moved between the well and the bedroom with mechanical precision, his face set in lines of desperate determination. Around 2 a.m, Nora sent him to rest. I can't, he said flatly. You've been working in brutal heat all day. If you collapse, you're no good to anyone. She met his eyes steadily. I won't leave her, I promise. But you need to close your eyes for an hour, drink some water, eat something. Then you can relieve me. He resisted for another minute, then nodded reluctantly. 1 hour, then I'm back. Nora listened to his heavy footsteps descend the stairs, then turned her full attention to Lily. The child was restless, tossing despite being barely conscious, her skin so hot it hurt to touch. Nora continued the rhythm they'd established, cool cloth, gentle words, watching for any change that might signal improvement or decline. Somewhere in those dark hours, Nora found herself talking to Lily, even though the child couldn't hear her. She talked about her mother, about the garden in Philadelphia, where she'd learned to coax things from the earth. She talked about the future, about all the things they'd do together when Lily was well, more lessons learning to sew, maybe teaching her to bake the bread her mother used to make. She talked about belonging and home and the strange ways that life could surprise you, how the worst day could somehow lead to the best thing. "You have to stay with us," she whispered, wringing out another cloth. "Your father needs you. I need you. You've become so important to me. Do you understand? In just a few weeks, you've made a place for yourself in my heart, and I'm not ready to lose that. I'm not ready to lose you." The admission surprised her with its intensity. When had this child become so essential? When had this temporary arrangement started feeling like home? But there was no time to in those questions now, not with Lily's labored breathing filling the room and the fever showing no sign of breaking. Caleb returned exactly 1 hour later, his face drawn, but his jaw set with renewed determination. "Any change?" "Not yet, but she's still fighting." They settled into their vigil together, working in silent coordination that spoke of a partnership deeper than words. When Lily thrashed, they steadied her together. When she needed water, one held her while the other brought the cup to her lips. When the cloth grew warm too quickly, they changed it in tandem, their movements synchronized. Dawn began to creep through the windows around 5 pale gray light that offered no relief from the heat that was already building. Nora felt exhaustion pulling at her, making her movements clumsy, but she pushed through it. Beside her, Caleb looked haggard, his eyes red-rimmed and his face drawn with strain. "I'm going to ride for the doctor," he said quietly. "This has gone on too long." But before Nora could respond, Lily stirred. Her eyes opened, truly opened, focused and aware, and she looked at her father with confusion. "Papa, why are you in my room?" Caleb's hands shot to her forehead, and Nora saw his whole body go still. Then his eyes closed and his shoulders sagged with relief, so profound it was almost painful to witness. "The fever," Nora breathed, checking for herself. "It broke." Lily's skin was still warm, but no longer burning. The terrible heat had receded, leaving behind normal warmth and a child who looked exhausted but aware. She blinked us at them, taking in their disheveled appearance with growing concern. "Did something bad happen? You both look scared." "You were sick, little bird. Very sick." Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. "But you fought through it just like I knew you would." "I don't remember much. Just feeling hot and my head hurting and Nora talking to me about gardens." She frowned. "You stayed with me." "We both did." Nora felt tears prick her eyes, relief and exhaustion combining into something overwhelming. "Can you drink some water?" They got half a cup into her before Lily's eyes began to drift closed again. This time her sleep was natural, peaceful. The dangerous edge of crisis passed. Nora and Caleb sat beside the bed watching her breathe, neither willing to leave just yet, as if their presence alone could anchor her to this side of recovery. "Thank you," Caleb said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "If you hadn't been here, if I'd been alone." "But you weren't alone." Nora reached over and took his hand without thinking, gripping it firmly. "And she's going to be fine. Children are resilient. A few days of rest and she'll be running around like nothing happened." Caleb looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. In the growing morning light, Nora could see every line of exhaustion, every shadow of fear that had marked the night. But she could also see something else, a kind of recognition, an acknowledgement of what had passed between them during those dark hours. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said. "When I saw her lying there burning up, all I could think about was Catherine, about how helpless I was then. But you didn't freeze. You knew what to do, and you didn't stop even when it looked—" He swallowed hard. "You saved her life." "We saved her life, together." The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meanings neither was quite ready to examine. Together. They had worked together, fought together, kept vigil together through the longest night. And in doing so, something had shifted between them. Some boundary had been crossed that Nora suspected they couldn't uncross even if they wanted to. She became aware suddenly of how close they were sitting, of Caleb's hand still gripping hers, of the intimacy of this moment in the quiet dawn. She should pull away, should reestablish the careful distance they'd maintained. But she didn't. Neither did he. "I need to tell you something," Caleb said, his gray eyes intense on hers. "These past weeks having you here, it's changed things, for both of us. Lily's not the only one who's gotten attached." Nora's breath caught. "Caleb, let me finish, please." He took a breath as if gathering courage. "I know you came here because you had nowhere else to go. I know this was supposed to be temporary, just until you figured out your next move. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling temporary to me. It started feeling like maybe this could be something real, something permanent." The words Nora had been both hoping for and dreading hung between them. Her heart hammered against her ribs, hope and fear warring inside her chest. "I don't know what I have to offer you," Caleb continued. A hard life on an isolated ranch. A man who's better with horses than conversation. A child who needs more than I know how to give her. It's not much compared to what you might find elsewhere. It's everything, Nora heard herself say. The words came from someplace deep and honest, cutting through all her carefully constructed defenses. Don't you understand this ranch, this child you... It's everything I thought I'd lost when Victor Hayes walked away. Purpose, belonging, a place where I matter. Caleb's grip on her hand tightened. Then stay, not as hired help or temporary arrangement. Stay as... He struggled with the words, a man unused to speaking his heart. Stay as my wife, as Lily's mother, as part of this family. The proposal was nothing like what Nora had imagined during those long weeks traveling west to meet a stranger. There was no romance, no pretty speeches, no promises of easy happiness, but there was something better, truth spoken plainly by a man who'd learned the hard way what mattered and what didn't. People will talk, she said, testing the idea, examining it for flaws. They already whisper about me being here. If we married after only a month, let them talk. I don't care about gossip. I care about building a life that works, that's honest, that's based on something real. Caleb's voice was firm. You've proven yourself 100 times over. You've worked harder than anyone I have ever known. You've cared for my daughter like she was your own. You didn't run when things got hard. You stayed and you fought. That's all the proof I need. Nora looked at Lily sleeping peacefully now, her small face relaxed and free of pain. She thought about the garden thriving under her care, about the house slowly transforming into a home, about the quiet satisfaction of work that mattered. She thought about Caleb's steady presence, his rough kindness, the way he'd looked at her during the long night, like she was essential, like her being there made all the difference. It won't be easy, she said quietly, making this work, building a marriage out of necessity and circumstance. Nothing worthwhile ever is. Caleb shifted closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face with surprising gentleness. But I think we've got something most couples don't start with. We've already seen each other at our worst. We've already worked through crisis together. We know what we're getting. He was right. There would be no ugly surprises, no discovering too late that they couldn't weather hardship together. They'd already been tested and hadn't broken. Yes, Nora said the word coming out steady and sure. Yes, I'll stay. I'll marry you. Caleb's eyes closed briefly, relief washing over his features. When he opened them again, there was warmth there Nora hadn't seen before, not the heat of passion, but something deeper and more durable. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was chaste and solemn, sealing the promise they just made. When they pulled apart, Lily was watching them with sleepy satisfaction. I knew it, she mumbled, a smile tugging at her lips despite her exhaustion. I told Papa you should stay forever. You should be sleeping, Nora said, but she couldn't keep the joy from her voice. I am sleeping. This is a dream. Lily's eyes drifted closed again, but the smile remained. A really good dream. Caleb laughed, a sound Nora had heard so rarely it startled her. He pulled her close, wrapping his arm around her shoulders, and together they sat watching Lily sleep as the sun climbed higher and the ranch came to life around them. The heat would return with the day, fierce and unforgiving. There would be work to do, challenges to face, gossip to endure. But for this moment in the aftermath of crisis and the beginning of something new, Nora let herself simply be present, grateful for the child breathing peacefully, for the man beside her, for the unexpected grace of second chances. She had come west expecting one life and found something entirely different, not easier, not simpler, but infinitely more real. And as morning light filled the small bedroom, Nora Brennan, soon to be, Nora Mercer, felt something she hadn't felt since her parents died, the solid certainty of being exactly where she belonged. Continuing part 3. They let Lily sleep through the morning, while the house filled with golden light that promised another scorching day. Caleb finally stood, his joints creaking from the long vigil, and looked down at Nora with an expression she was learning to rod, gratitude mixed with something deeper, something that looked like wonder at finding himself here at this particular crossroads. I should check the cattle, he said quietly. Make sure we didn't lose any more to the heat. And I should start breakfast. You haven't eaten since yesterday afternoon. They moved downstairs together, and the simple act of being in the kitchen side by side felt different now. The air between them held a new quality, anticipation perhaps, or the strange vulnerability that came with having spoken truths that couldn't be taken back. Caleb lingered at his door, his hat in his hands, as if there was something more he wanted to say. "We should do it soon," he said finally. "The wedding, no point in waiting." Nora turned from the stove where she'd been building up the fire. "People will say we're rushing. People will say what they want regardless of timing. Better to give them something definite to talk about than let speculation run wild." He met her eyes steadily. "Unless you want more time, to be certain." "I'm certain." The words came without hesitation, surprising Nora with their firmness. She was certain not because she'd fallen madly in love, or because this was the future she'd dreamed of, but because certainty didn't always come from passion. Sometimes it came from recognizing what was real and choosing to build on that foundation. Caleb nodded slowly, something like relief crossing his weathered features. "Saturday, then. That gives us 5 days to make arrangements. I'll ride into town tomorrow, talk to the minister. I'll need a dress." Nora looked down at her worn work dress, stained from the garden and rumpled from the long night. "Something decent for a wedding. There's fabric in the trunk upstairs. Catherine bought it before she—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "She never got to use it. Good quality cream-colored with small flowers. You could make something from that if you wanted." The offer was complicated, using his dead wife's fabric for his new wife's wedding dress. But Nora understood the gesture beneath it. He was giving her permission to take Catherine's place to make something new from what had been saved, for a future that never came. "I'd be honored," she said quietly. After Caleb left for the barn, Nora stood for a long moment in the quiet kitchen, trying to absorb the speed with which her life was changing. A month ago, she'd been in Philadelphia packing her single carpetbag with hope and trepidation. 3 weeks ago, she'd stepped off a train, expecting one future and finding devastation instead. And now, impossibly, she was preparing to marry a man she barely knew, to become mother to a child who'd captured her heart, to claim this hard life as her own. She should be terrified. She should be questioning every decision. But instead, she felt a strange calm settling over her, the peace that came from no longer fighting against circumstances, but instead choosing to embrace them fully. The morning passed in the haze of necessary tasks. Nora cooked a proper breakfast and made Caleb eat before he returned to work. She checked on Lily repeatedly, relieved each time to find the child's temperature normal, her sleep natural and restorative. By noon, Lily woke properly, weak but coherent, asking for water and then food with the healthy appetite of someone recovering. "Papa says you're going to be my mama," Lily said between careful bites of broth and bread. "For real, not just helping, but actually my mama." Nora settled onto the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. "If that's all right with you, I know I can't replace your mother." "I don't remember her enough to compare," Lily interrupted with the blunt honesty of childhood. "I just know that when you're here, the house feels different. Warmer even when it's hot, like it's supposed to feel." She paused, her small face serious. "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Nora smoothed the child's dark hair, her heart expanding with a fierce protectiveness she'd never experienced before. "I promise I'll do my best to be what you need." "You already are." Lily's eyes were drifting closed again, exhaustion still claiming her despite the broken fever. "I'm glad you got left on the platform. Is that bad to say?" Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "No, sweetheart, that's not bad at all." Over the next days, the ranch took on the quality of a place preparing for transformation. Caleb rode into town as promised, returning with news that the minister would perform the ceremony Saturday afternoon at the ranch. He'd also stopped at the general store, enduring Samuel's surprise congratulations and bringing back supplies, including a spool of white ribbon Nora had mentioned wanting for Lily's hair. The gesture touched her more than expensive gifts might have. It showed he'd been listening, had remembered small details in the midst of everything else. These were the things that built a marriage, Nora thought, not grand romantic gestures, but daily attention, steady reliability. The choice to notice what mattered to the people you cared for. She found the trunk in Caleb's room. The fabric exactly as he described, cream cotton, printed with delicate blue flowers, soft and fine quality. Catherine must have planned something special, Nora thought, running her fingers over the material. A dress for some occasion that never came, some hoped-for celebration that illness had stolen away. "Thank you," Nora whispered to the woman she'd never meet. "I'll take good care of them. I promise." She cut the fabric carefully that evening, working by lamplight after Lily had gone to bed. The pattern was simple. She didn't have time for anything elaborate, but the material deserved respect. As her scissors moved through the cloth, Caleb appeared in the doorway, watching silently. "Catherine would have approved," he said finally. "She wasn't one for waste. She'd be glad to see it used for something good. Tell me about her. Nora looked up from her work. Not if it's too painful, but I'd like to know. For Lily's sake, if nothing else. Caleb lowered himself into the chair across from her, his large frame making the furniture seem fragile. He was quiet for so long Nora thought he might refuse, but then he began to speak, his voice rough with memory. She was strong. That's what I remember most. Came west alone, survived her intended dying, married a stranger because it made practical sense. She could have been bitter about it, could have spent our marriage mourning what she'd lost, but she chose to build something instead. He paused, his hands flexing. We didn't have a love match at first. That came later, grew slow over years of working side by side. But we had respect from the beginning and trust. And that turned out to be enough foundation for everything else. The parallel wasn't lost on Nora. He was telling her their story while ostensibly telling Catherine's, letting her know what he believed about marriage, about how love could be built rather than simply found. She sounds remarkable, Nora said. She was. And so are you in different ways. Caleb's gray eyes met hers directly. I'm not trying to replace her with you, Nora. I'm trying to build something new. I want you to know that. I do know it. Nora set down her scissors, giving him her full attention. I'm not trying to be her shadow. I'm trying to be myself, make my own place here. You already have. He stood, moving toward the stairs. The house feels lived in again. Lily laughs. I come in from the fields, and there's good food and clean clothes and someone who... He stopped, struggling with the words. Someone who makes it feel like coming home instead of just coming back to work. After he'd gone upstairs, Nora sat for a long moment with the half-cut fabric in her lap, absorbing what he'd said. This was what they were building, not passion or romance, but something steadier and deeper. A partnership, a home, a future constructed from honest work and mutual need, and the choice to show up for each other day after day. She could live with that. More than live with it, she could thrive in it. The dress came together over the next 3 days, Nora stitching in stolen moments between chores. It wouldn't be fancy, but it would be clean and new, and made with care. Lily recovered quickly with the resilience of childhood, though Nora and Caleb both watched her carefully, neither quite able to forget how close they'd come to losing her. On Friday afternoon, a wagon appeared on the road from town. Nora watched from the garden as it approached, recognizing Samuel from the general store, and beside him, unexpectedly, a woman in a blue dress. They pulled up near the house just as Caleb emerged from the barn. Afternoon, Caleb, Samuel called, climbing down with the careful movements of a man whose back bothered him. Heard there's to be a wedding tomorrow. Thought we'd come by with our good wishes. The woman, his wife Nora assumed, was already moving toward the garden where Nora stood, her expression warm but curious. You must be Nora, she said, extending her hand. I'm Grace. Samuel's told me about you, about what happened when you arrived. I'm sorry for that. Victor Hayes should be ashamed of himself. Nora shook her hand, surprised by the firm grip and the directness. Thank you. It wasn't the arrival I'd planned. I imagine not, but it seems things have worked out. Grace glanced toward the house, then back to Nora. Caleb's a good man, quiet but good, and that little girl has needed a mother. You'll have your hands full, but if you're willing to work, you'll do fine. It wasn't exactly a warm welcome, but it was honest assessment from someone who clearly cared about Caleb and Lily. Nora found she appreciated it more than hollow pleasantries would have meant. I am willing, she said simply. Then you'll fit in just fine out here. Grace reached into the basket she'd brought. I made you a wedding cake. Nothing fancy, but every bride deserves something sweet on her day. The gesture, unexpected and kind, made Nora's throat tight. You didn't have to. Of course I didn't have to. I wanted to. Grace's expression softened. We're not a large community out here. We take care of our own. And you're one of us now, whether the weddings happen yet or not. Samuel and Caleb had moved to stand near the garden, their conversation quiet but animated. Nora could see Caleb's posture gradually relaxing, some of the weariness leaving his shoulders. When they finally shook hands, Samuel clapped Caleb on the back with genuine warmth. We'll be here tomorrow, 2 o'clock sharp, Samuel said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Grace and I, and we'll bring the Johnsons if they're willing. Every wedding needs witnesses. After they left, Caleb stood watching the wagon recede into the distance, his expression thoughtful. Didn't expect that, he said when Nora joined him. Neither did I. I thought the town would be... She trailed off, unsure how to finish. Hostile, judgmental. Caleb's mouth twisted. Some will be. Mrs. Aldrich and her crowd will have plenty to say about how fast this happened, about propriety and scandal. But Samuel and Grace, the Johnsons, a few others, they're good people. They'll stand by us. That's all we need. Then Nora slipped her hand into his, a gesture that still felt new, but was becoming familiar. A few good people in our corner. He squeezed her hand gently, his calloused palm warm against hers. You're not nervous about tomorrow. Terrified, Nora admitted, but not about marrying you, about whether I'll be enough, whether I can really do this, be a wife and mother, make a life out here. You've already been doing it for weeks. Tomorrow just makes it official. He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes serious. Nora, I need you to understand something. I'm not a man who speaks pretty words or makes big romantic gestures. I'm going to disappoint you sometimes, frustrate you often. This life is hard and lonely and the work never ends. I know all that, but I'll show up every day. I'll show up and I'll work beside you and I'll do my best to be a good husband and father. I'll be honest with you. I'll provide for you and I'll stand by you when things get hard. He paused. That's what I can promise. Is it enough? Nora looked at this man who'd taken her in when she had nothing, who'd given her purpose and place, who'd fought for his daughter with everything he had. She thought about the steady reliability he was offering, not passion or poetry, but daily presence and unwavering commitment. It was what Catherine had built a life on, what had created the home Nora could still feel echoes of in this house. It's more than enough, she said. It's everything that matters. The wedding day dawned clear and hot, the sky that particular intense blue that promised another scorching afternoon. Nora woke early out of habit, her stomach fluttering with nerves that had nothing to do with doubt and everything to do with the simple magnitude of what she was about to do. Today she would marry Caleb Mercer. Today she would become Nora Mercer, wife and mother, permanently rooted to this place and these people. She dressed carefully in the new dress, pleased with how it had turned out. The cream fabric with its small blue flowers was modest but pretty, the cut simple enough to be practical, but feminine enough for a wedding. She'd sewn careful stitches throughout the night, finishing just before dawn, and now she smoothed the skirt with hands that trembled slightly. Lily burst into her room without knocking, her eyes wide. You look like a princess, a real princess. I look like a woman in a new dress. Nora corrected gently, but she couldn't help smiling at the child's enthusiasm. Can I wear the blue ribbon in my hair, the one Papa brought? Of course. Come here, let me braid it in properly. They worked together, getting ready, Lily chattering excitedly about the wedding while Nora tried to calm the butterflies in her stomach. Through the window, she could see Caleb in the yard wearing what must be his Sunday clothes, dark trousers and a white shirt, his hair still damp from washing. He looked uncomfortable in the formal attire, but undeniably handsome, and Nora felt her heart kick unexpectedly at the sight of him. By 1 o'clock, the small gathering had assembled. Samuel and Grace arrived first, followed shortly by a couple. Nora hadn't met the Johnsons, middle-aged and weathered, clearly ranch folk like themselves. The minister came last, a thin man with kind eyes who'd made the long ride from town. They gathered on the porch where there was shade and a slight breeze. It wasn't a church wedding with flowers and music and rows of guests. It was 5 people standing witness, while 2 others promised to build a life together. But there was dignity to it, Nora thought, an honesty that a more elaborate ceremony might have lacked. The minister spoke briefly about marriage as partnership, about the importance of mutual support and shared purpose. He didn't speak of love, perhaps sensing this wasn't that kind of union yet, but of commitment, fidelity, and the choice to stand together through hardship. When it came time for vows, Caleb took Nora's hands in his large, work-roughened ones and spoke clearly. I, Caleb Mercer, take you, Nora Brennan, to be my lawful wedded wife. I promise to provide for you, to protect you, and to stand by you through whatever comes. I promise to honor you, to work beside you, and to build a home with you. I promise to be a true husband to you from this day forward. Nora's turn came, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I, Nora Brennan, take you, Caleb Mercer, to be my lawful wedded husband. I promise to work beside you, to care for your home and your daughter, and to stand by you through whatever comes. I promise to honor you, to be faithful to you, and to build a life with you. I promise to be a true wife. I promise to be a true wife to you from this day forward. Simple vows stripped of flowery language, focused on the practical realities of the life they were choosing. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb leaned down and kissed Nora gently, a brief press of lips that sealed their promise. Lily cheered and the small group applauded. Grace produced the cake she'd brought, and they shared it on the porch along with lemonade Nora had made that morning. It was a modest celebration, but there was joy in it, genuine warmth from their few guests, and relief from Caleb and Nora that they'd taken this step made their commitment official. "You chose well," Grace told Nora quietly while the men talked near the porch rail. "Caleb's the kind of man who will weather any storm, and that child needs you. Anyone can see that." "I need them too," Nora admitted. "More than I knew." That's how the best marriages work, meeting each other's needs, building something together. Grace squeezed her arm. "You'll do fine, dear. Just remember that every marriage has hard days. The trick is to keep showing up even when it's difficult." The guests departed as the afternoon wore on, leaving the newly formed family alone. Lily, exhausted by excitement and still recovering from her illness, went down for a nap without protest. Caleb and Nora found themselves alone in the kitchen, the reality of what they'd done settling over them like dust after a storm. "Well," Caleb said finally, "we're married." "We are." Nora felt suddenly shy, uncertain of what came next. They'd been living under the same roof for weeks, but this was different. This was permanent, binding, real in ways the temporary arrangement had never been. Caleb seemed to sense her uncertainty. "Nothing has to change tonight," he said quietly. "You can keep your room for now. Take time to adjust. I won't rush you." The offer was kindly meant, giving her space and time, but Nora found herself shaking her head. "I don't need time," she said. "We made promises today." "I meant them. All of them." Something shifted in Caleb's expression, surprise perhaps, ingratitude, and something warmer that made Nora's pulse quicken. He moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that seemed impossible from such rough, work-worn hands. "I'll do right by you," he promised. "I'll be a good husband." "I know." And she did know it, felt it with a certainty that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with recognizing the fundamental decency of the man she'd married. Their second kiss was different from the first, deeper, more personal, carrying the weight of promise and possibility. When they pulled apart, Nora felt something click into place inside her chest, as if a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing had suddenly been found. Swayam, town confrontation and railroad conflict. The first weeks of marriage passed in a rhythm that felt both new and strangely inevitable. Nora moved into Caleb's room, their room now, and found that sharing space with him came naturally. He was tidy in his habits, quiet in his movements, respectful of her need for privacy as she adjusted to this new intimacy. The work continued as it always had, sunrise to sundown, the endless cycle of ranch life. But there was a new dimension to it now, a sense of building together rather than simply working side by side. It was during their second week as husband and wife that Nora encountered Mrs. Aldrich in town. Caleb had driven them in for supplies, Lily bouncing excitedly in the wagon bed at the prospect of seeing Samuel's store and maybe getting a peppermint stick if she was good. They just finished loading sacks of flour and sugar when Mrs. Aldrich appeared on the boardwalk, her face pinching with disapproval the moment she spotted Nora. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, making the name sound vaguely distasteful. "Still playing house on the Mercer ranch, I see." Nora felt Caleb stiffen beside her, but she touched his arm lightly, a signal to let her handle this. "Not playing, Nora corrected calmly. "Living. Building a life with my husband and daughter." "Your daughter." Martha's laugh was sharp. "You mean Caleb's daughter, whom you stepped in to raise after being rejected by Victor Hayes. The whole town knows the truth of how you came to be here. The whole town knows I was abandoned on that platform, yes." Nora refused to look away, refused to show shame for something that wasn't her fault. "They also know Caleb offered me shelter when I had none. That I worked hard, that I've made a good home for his child. If there's scandal in that, it says more about the people finding scandal than about me." Martha's face reddened. "The speed of it all, rejected one day, married the next month, it's unseemly. People talk. Let them talk." Nora's voice remained steady. "I know who I am, I know what I've built. The opinions of people who judge without understanding don't change those facts." She walked past Martha toward the wagon, her head high despite the trembling in her hands. Caleb followed, and she heard him say quietly to Martha as he passed, "My wife is twice the woman you'll ever be, Aldrich. And if you've got something to say about our marriage, you can say it to me directly." In the wagon with Lily oblivious in the back and Caleb beside her, Nora let out a shaky breath. "You all right?" Caleb asked. "I am." And she was. The encounter had bothered her less than it would have months ago. She was no longer the desperate woman on the platform, no longer defined by Victor Hayes' rejection. She was Nora Mercer with a husband who defended her and a daughter who loved her and a life she'd built with her own hands. Martha's judgment couldn't touch that. But if Mrs. Aldrich was merely an annoyance, the railroad company proved to be a genuine threat. The first letter arrived in early autumn, delivered by a nervous-looking postal rider who clearly wanted nothing to do with its contents. Caleb read it in the kitchen, his jaw tightening with each line. "They're claiming eminent domain," he said flatly. "Say they need to run track through the ranch for the public good, giving us 30 days to vacate or they'll file with the territorial court." Nora took the letter from his hands, scanning the legal language, with eyes that had been trained to spot weakness in such documents. Her father had taught her well, even if he'd been a flawed man in other ways. "They're bluffing," she said after a moment. "Look here, they claim necessary passage for commerce, but they haven't proven this is the only viable route. Montana territorial law requires them to demonstrate that alternative routes are genuinely impractical." Caleb stared at her. "How do you know that?" And so Nora told him about her father, the respected lawyer, Robert Brennan Ashford of Philadelphia, about the scandal that had destroyed their family. Her father had taken bribes to influence a zoning decision, been caught, faced ruin. About her mother's death from heartbreak, her father's suicide, the name that had become synonymous with corruption. "I changed my name to just Brennan," she said quietly. "Tried to escape it. The advertisement for mail-order brides. Again, what seemed like a chance to start fresh, become someone new." Caleb was silent for a long moment, processing this revelation. "Then can you help me fight them, the railroad?" "I can try." Over the following weeks, Nora worked late into the nights, drafting legal arguments by lamplight, while Caleb read to Lily in the next room. She wrote to a former colleague of her father's, a good man who'd stood by the Brennan family even after the scandal. He sent back precedent cases, advice, encouragement. The railroad company sent another letter more threatening. Then a representative showed up at the ranch, a slick, talking man in an expensive suit who offered Caleb money to sell a portion of the land voluntarily. "Generous sum," the man said. "More than fair market value. You could expand elsewhere, start fresh." "No," Caleb said simply. "Mr. Mercer, be reasonable. The railroad is coming through here one way or another. This is your chance to profit from the inevitable." I said no. "This land is where my wife is buried, where my daughter's growing up, where I'm building a future. Not everything can be bought." The representative left, but Nora knew this wasn't over. 2 weeks later, another visitor arrived. Nora was in the garden when she heard the horse, looked up to see a familiar figure dismounting. Victor Hayes. He looked different than she remembered, heavier, his face florid, his movements less assured. When he saw her, genuine shock crossed his features. I mean Nora." He caught himself. "I heard you'd married Mercer, but I thought it was just talk." Nora stood slowly, wiping dirt from her hands. "It's not talk. I'm Mrs. Mercer. I came on railroad business." He gestured to the saddlebag. "I work for them now as a local liaison. They sent me to discuss the land purchase with Caleb." Understanding dawned cold and clear. "You're working for the people trying to take our ranch. It's not personal. It's just business. The railroad needs this route and they're willing to pay well. You and Mercer could..." "Could what?" Nora's voice went hard. "Walk away from our home because it's convenient for your employers." "Our home?" Victor's expression turned ugly. "You've been here, what, a few months after I rejected you at the platform, and now you're playing lady of the manor?" Caleb's voice cut through the air like a whip. "You need to leave now." He'd emerged from the barn, and there was something dangerous in his stance, the controlled violence of a man who'd reached his limit. Victor sneered. "The ranch wife defends herself. How touching. Mercer, be smart about this. The railroad will win eventually. Take the money while you can." "I've beaten tougher men than you," Caleb said quietly. "And I'll beat the railroad too. Now get off my land before I throw you off." Victor left, but his parting words hung in the air. "You can't win this fight, Mercer. Better men than you have tried." That night, Caleb and Nora sat on the porch long after Lily had gone to bed. "They're going to force this to court," Nora said. "File an eminent domain claim, make us defend." "Then we defend." Caleb's jaw was set. I'm not giving up this land without a fight. It could be expensive. We need to travel to Helena for the hearing, maybe hire a real lawyer. We have a real lawyer. Caleb took her hand. You. You understand this better than anyone. Can you do it? Represent us. Nora thought about her father, about the law he'd loved and then betrayed, about the knowledge he'd passed to her before his fall, about using those skills for something good, something right. Yes, she said, I can do it. The trial. Helena in winter was bitterly cold, the territorial capital draped in snow and ice. Nora, Caleb, and Lily made the journey in early December, their wagon loaded with documents and precedent cases Nora had painstakingly prepared. They stayed in a modest boarding house, and on the morning of the hearing, Nora dressed in her best dress, the wedding dress carefully cleaned and pressed. She looked like what she was, a ranch wife who'd learned law from her father and was determined to protect her home. The courthouse was intimidating, all dark wood and stern-faced officials. The railroad's lawyers were everything Nora expected: expensive suits, condescending, smiles, the absolute certainty of men who always won. But Nora had something they didn't. She was fighting for her home, her family, her future, and she knew the law as well as they did. The hearing began. The railroad presented their case: economic necessity, public benefit, fair compensation offered. Their lawyer was smooth, confident, citing precedents and legal doctrines with practiced ease. Then it was Nora's turn. She stood, smoothed her dress, and began to speak. Her voice was steady, clear, carrying the weight of truth rather than rhetoric. She dismantled their arguments point by point, showed maps proving alternative routes existed, cited territorial law requiring proof of absolute necessity, demonstrated that the railroad's claim of public benefit was actually private profit. The railroad lawyers began to look less confident. The judge leaned forward, listening intently. Then midway through her argument, the railroad made their offer. Your Honor, their lead attorney interrupted. In the interest of avoiding prolonged litigation, my clients are prepared to significantly increase their offer. Mr. Mercer would retain 80% of his land and receive substantial compensation for the portion needed for the rail line. This is far more generous than standard eminent domain proceedings. It was a test, a temptation. Take the money, keep most of the land, end this fight. The judge looked at Caleb. Mr. Mercer, this is a significant offer. Would you like time to consider? Caleb stood. No, Your Honor, I don't need time. The courtroom went silent. That land they want includes my wife's grave. It's where my daughter plays. It's where we've built our life. His voice was quiet but carried absolute conviction. No amount of money changes the fact that it's ours, that we've earned it through work and sacrifice, that it means more to us than profit means to them. He looked directly at the railroad lawyers. Not everything can be bought. Some things are worth fighting for. This is one of them. Nora felt her throat tighten with pride and love for this man who refused to compromise on what mattered. The judge deliberated for what felt like hours but was probably minutes. Then he spoke. I find the railroad's claim of absolute necessity unconvincing. Alternative routes have been demonstrated. The land in question has been productively used and cannot be proven essential for public benefit. Eminent domain claim denied. Costs to be paid by the railroad company. They'd won. In the courthouse hallway, Nora and Caleb held each other while Lily danced around them, not fully understanding, but catching their joy. They'd protected their home, proven that ordinary people could stand up to power and win. Victor Hayes was there in the hallway watching. He'd come as the railroad's liaison, expecting to witness their defeat. Instead, he'd seen Nora, the woman he'd rejected as unworthy, argue like the skilled lawyer she was and win. Their eyes met. Nora saw something like regret flicker across his face before he turned away. She felt nothing for him. No anger, no vindication. He was simply irrelevant to the life she'd built. Epilogue, 1 year later. Spring 1887. The spring came to Montana with a rush of green after the long winter, wildflowers bursting across the grassland in waves of color that seemed to pulse with new life. Nora stood on the porch in the cool morning air, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. A year. It had been almost exactly 1 year since she'd stepped off that train, since Victor Hayes had torn her photograph, since Caleb had offered her refuge. So much had changed since that day. Everything had changed, and yet the rhythm of ranch life remained constant. Work at sunrise, meals together, evenings on the porch, watching the sky fade from autumn to purple to star-studded black. Behind her, the screen door creaked. Caleb emerged with 2 cups of coffee, handing her one before settling into the chair beside hers. They sat in comfortable silence, a morning ritual they'd developed over the months. No need for words when presence said everything. "Lily's getting the garden ready," he said finally, gesturing toward where their daughter, Nora thought, with a surge of fierce joy, was working with the determination of an 8-year-old who'd learned to love the earth. "She's got your mother's touch with plants. She's got her mama's patience." Caleb's hand found Nora's, their fingers lacing together as naturally as breathing. Both of them. They'd made their peace with Catherine's memory months ago. Nora had found the letter one autumn afternoon, tucked into a book on the high shelf, a letter Catherine had written to the woman who comes after me. Reading it had been like receiving a blessing from someone she'd never known. "If you're reading this, Daniel has found someone. Don't let him feel guilty for moving forward. Love him, love Lily. Don't make my mistake. Don't let grief make you lonely. Accept love when it comes. Build something beautiful." Catherine and Nora and Caleb had gone together to Catherine's grave, placed flowers, spoken words of gratitude. The ghost that had haunted the ranch for 2 years finally found rest, leaving space for new life to grow. "Samuel mentioned the railroads pulling out," Caleb said, pulling Nora from her thoughts. "Said their surveyors found a better route north of here. We won't have to fight them again." "Good," Nora smiled. "This land should stay as it is." "We're planning to expand the house," Caleb said, his hand moving to rest gently on her belly where their child grew. "Need a nursery, and maybe a proper study for you somewhere you can keep your law books, help other folks who need it." "Caleb Mercer, are you suggesting I practice law?" "I'm suggesting you use the gifts you have. Plenty of ranch folk out here get taken advantage of because they don't know their rights. You could change that." The idea settled over Nora like sunshine, warm and full of possibility. A purpose beyond the ranch, a way to help the community that had accepted her despite the scandal of her arrival. "I'd like that," she said quietly. Lily came running up to the porch, her hands dirty and her braids coming loose. Nora had taught her to do them herself now, though she still asked for help on special occasions. "Mama, the first tomatoes are coming in. Come see Mama." The words still made Nora's heart swell every time. They'd made it official 6 months ago. Caleb had started adoption proceedings, legally making Nora Lily's mother in the eyes of the law as well as the heart. "I'll be right there, sweetheart." As Lily ran back to the garden, Caleb stood and pulled Nora to her feet, his arms coming around her, carefully mindful of the baby between them. "Happy?" he asked, though she suspected he already knew the answer. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Nora said honestly. "Even though it's not what I planned, even though I came here expecting something completely different. Sometimes the best things come from the worst moments." "Yes." Nora looked out over the ranch, the house they'd expanded, the garden flourishing, the land they'd defended together. "Sometimes being unwanted by the wrong person means being found by the right one." They walked hand in hand toward the garden, toward their daughter who was calling out about tomatoes and beans and all the growing things. Behind them, the house stood solid and welcoming, no longer just Caleb's ranch or Catherine's memory, but theirs. A home built from honest work and daily choice and the slow accumulation of shared moments that created something stronger than romance ever could. Nora thought about Victor Hayes, sometimes wondered if he ever regretted tearing that photograph. But mostly she thought about the strange mercy of his cruelty, how his rejection had pushed her toward this life, this family, this place where she was needed and valued and loved. She'd come to Montana as a rejected mail-order bride, with nothing but a carpetbag and broken dreams. She'd found work, then shelter, then purpose. She'd found a daughter who needed a mother and a man who needed a partner. And in the findings, she discovered who she truly was, not the desperate woman on the platform, but someone stronger. Someone capable of building a life from whatever materials Providence provided. The photograph Victor Hayes had torn meant nothing now. It was the past, and Nora was focused on the future, on the child growing inside her, on the daughter laughing in the garden, on the man who stood beside her through every season. On a life that wasn't perfect or easy, but was undeniably completely hers. As the Montana sun climbed higher, painting the grassland in shades of green and gold, Nora Brennan Mercer put her hand in her husband's and walked toward the garden where their daughter waited, toward the growing things that responded to patient care, toward a future built on the solid ground of work and trust and the choice to show up for each other day after day after day. She'd come west looking for a home. She'd found something better. She'd learned how to build one. Thank you for joining Nora on her journey from rejection to redemption, from the platform where she was abandoned to the ranch where she found belonging. Sometimes the doors that close in our faces are blessings in disguise, pushing us toward futures we never imagined, but desperately needed. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories of second chances, unexpected grace, and the beautiful lives we build from broken pieces. Share in the comments what spoke to you most. Was it Nora's strength, Caleb's quiet kindness, or little Lily's trust? Remember, your worth isn't determined by those who reject you, but by the life you build despite them. Until next time, may you find your own unexpected redemptions. The end. Total word count approximately 24,800 words.